further ado, here's your host, L.Nathan Hare.
All right, here we go. Living now, living right now. This is L.Nathan Hare, your host here for this next hour at WFO Power 96.5 FM on your dial. Our principal sponsor, of course, is the Community Action Organization of Western New York, still fighting the war on poverty, now going into our 53rd year. June 8th starts our 53rd year. In fact, if you've not gotten a ticket yet for our annual dinner, or it was actually an annual luncheon this year, it'll be from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock on Friday, June 8th. At the Buffalo Convention Center. You should call our number at 881-5150. That's 881-5150. Ask for Yvonne Hairston or for Carrie Soccer. That's Yvonne Hairston or Carrie Soccer. And our tickets are only $50. It'll give you an opportunity for you to meet and greet, network. We're going to have our keynote speaker is going to be Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, who will be updating us on how our state is responding to the changes in the tax law, what the impact is going to be on us in terms of services, in terms of availability of school assistance, and so on. So it's really an important opportunity for us to be able to get together with each other, talk with people that are in a position to know things, and use that information to help us plan for our future. So if you don't have a ticket yet, I think we have not certain. I think it's like 71 or 72 seats. I think we have about 420 total seats. I think about 71, 72 seats are still available. If you call 881-5150, we can get you hooked up right away. I want to welcome all of you to this hour of insight, introspection, and interpretation of facts, events, and trends affecting you right here and right now in Buffalo and the Western New York community, and in fact, connect you to communities all across the country. Each week, we focus on things we think will be of interest to you, which will serve to motivate you and serve to connect you to the broader issues that affect our communities here in Western New York. Now, today's program is live, so you can call in. You can join our discussion. Hope that you will. Our number here again is 837-1112. That's 837-1112. I know that you probably saw, if you've gotten today's paper, that a book has come out called Elite Discrimination, and it written by Dr. Gary Orfield, who works for the Office of Civil Rights, who has been working with Buffalo for several years now, trying to help Buffalo to overcome the pattern of segregation that still exists in the Buffalo public school system, and in fact has increased in some ways in the Buffalo school district. And so when you saw that article, it talks about some of the things that have occurred that have maintained dysfunction in the Buffalo public school system. Now, we've been talking on this program about the direction that the Trump administration is going in for the national policy on education, with Betsy DeVos as the education secretary. So I want to build on those two themes in the course of this program. I'm going to start with an article written by Mark Santow and Richard Rothstein. The article was entitled A Different Kind of Choice, Educational Inequality, and the Continuing Significance of Racial Segregation. These authors work for the Economic Policy Institute. This is an article actually was written in 2012, but it talks about things that will inform the discussion that we're going to be having today. With school segregation continuing to increase, lower income Black and brown children are often isolated from the positive peer influences of middle class children. And what they mean by that is that middle income school children tend to be in homes where there are adults who are reading to the kids when they're very young and continue to read to kids during their early adolescence. They tend to come from homes where there's a lot of books in the homes, and people do a lot of reading in the homes, so that the kids model the behavior of the adults. So if they see the adults reading, the kids want to read. They tend to come from homes where the adult environment includes many college-educated professional role models. If they're not in your house, they're in your family or extended family grouping. They tend to come from households where the parents have greater educational experience and the motivation such experiences bring. And they tend to come from households that have the time, confidence, and ability to monitor schools for academic standards. There is little chance that we can substantially narrow the achievement gap without breaking up heavy concentrations of low-income minority children in public schools. We talked about this in another program probably 4 months ago. I provided some research for us that demonstrated that when schools have heavy concentrations of low-income and poor students, the low-income poor students tend to affect the culture of the school, not the other way around. So if you have basically what they say is if you have more than 20% of your student population are low-income poor students, that percentage or higher, they tend to impact the behavior, the cultural context of that school, where the rest of the school children start to behave like the poor and low-income kids rather than the other way around. So it's not like 50-50. It doesn't require that much. I mean, 1 out of 5 of the students, you have more than 1 out of 5 that are these low, poor students as a percentage of the overall population of students in the school. You tend to find yourself in a situation where those low-income poor students, their culture affects the culture of the school as a whole. So it gives you a science, right? Science is, predictable stuff, right? You know that if you do X, you get Y. If doing X doesn't give you Y, it's not a science. It's just an opinion, right? So we want to work with science, right? So science says that if you stay below that threshold of 20%, you tend to have well-performing schools. And the lower income students tend to adopt the behaviors, the behavior norms, the aspirations, the cultural context of the middle income students. But when you get above 20%, it goes the other way. So science says keep the school populations below 20%, you got a shot, right? So that's what this work is talking about. At the same time that Dr. Orfield and the Office of Civil Rights are reporting that segregation and concentration in low-performing schools, or concentration of poor and low-income children in low-performing schools, that concentration is increasing. The Trump administration is leading what I'm referring to as the de facto privatization of public schools. Now, why do I say de facto? De facto means as a fact, or it's a fact. It's not that it's the written policy. You can't find something in the Trump administration says we're trying to privatize all of the public schools. They won't say that. But if you look at what's actually occurring, privatizing public schools seems to be, the aim of the Trump administration. If you look at what Betsy DeVos has done in Michigan, where she was a policy setter in the state of Michigan's school system, even though she never worked for a school, never ran a school, never ran a school district, never worked for the state administration of education, but she became a trustee in the Michigan system. She put, $200 million into the state of Michigan's Republican Party, and she was able to get her vision of what she wanted to see happen with public funds for education to make those things the policy of Michigan. As a result, 2/3 of the schools in Michigan right now are not only charter schools, they're for-profit private schools. Right? That gives you a choice. We have a caller hanging on? Hi, let me grab that call real quick. Hi, caller, are you there?
Good morning, Mr. Hare. Just a thought. I remember Dr. Williams, and we've had other superintendents here. If we're bringing in the poverty level, and I hate to use that expression, but I haven't made more than $20,000 over the last 10 years, so I sympathize. That's per year. Mm-hmm. Just how little money I make, how other people are strapped for cash, too. What about the thought of just having one class, one teacher, and then bringing in specialty teachers into the class, such as math, English, social studies, that way they can get the added attention that they need to help them so that you have more than one qualified teacher in the classroom. In other words, floating teachers. And that would give them the added education that they need. And then I got one quick comment. The Black Panther is playing at the McKinley 6. Tomorrow is half price on the popcorn and the pop. So you get a bucket of popcorn for $4, and you can get a large pop for $2.50, and both of them you can get free refills on. So anybody that hasn't seen the movie, you can go see it very inexpensively, say for $2.50, and then cheap popcorn and pop if they want to see it. It's a very good movie. I saw it yesterday. So I'll let you go, Mr. Hare, but, if we've got problems with teaching because we can't teach cursive reading or writing anymore, maybe we should go back to one teacher, one class, and then bring in specialty teachers. That way you have somebody that knows the students rather than shifting them around the school like we do. I'll hang up and listen. God bless. So Zechariah 2:12 from our conversation last week. Mm-hmm. You'll find that interesting reading.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later, Mr. Hare.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Zechariah 2:12. Okay. We have a comment or a question from our online listener.
Yes, they said, would you say keeping the numbers under 20% is the suburban formula, referring to the... Yeah.
Right. So I guess the best way that I can say it is that it would be easier. In fact, I'm going to talk about some recommendations in just a moment. It would be easier for you to create this 20% or lower threshold if you integrated the suburban school districts and the city school districts together, so that you could you could export students, I guess, from the heavy concentration, low income areas. You can export them into other areas so that they go to schools that are high performing schools, but don't become more than 20% of the student population in those schools. You tend to have a better impact on the success of those lower income students without having any negative impact on the middle income students at all. And I think that's the way that has to be approached. In fact, let me go through these quick recommendations. I think for the listener, this will make some sense. The decisions that are most, well, let me just say first with this Betsy DeVos thing, that what they're trying to do is to use public education funds to pay for private school tuition, where virtually all decisions at these private schools about the school's operations are in the hands of the individual school's board of trustees. Those decisions that are in the school board of trustees' hands are most impactful on who gets to enroll, who gets to stay, who gets pushed out, how students access the school, and how students are able to use school-based services. So with private for-profit firms now managing a growing number of charter and online schools, the ability of parents to use taxpayer-funded vouchers to pay or subsidize these essentially private schools' tuitions further further accelerate the de facto privatization of education that's already underway. The idea of each state allowing any low-income or special education student to transfer to any public school in the state is an idea that hasn't really caught hold across the country. But it sounds like when you hear that opportunity being expressed as a part of school choice, that this is a more democratic way for education choice to occur. If you've got schools all over Erie County and you could enroll in any one of those schools, you got more democracy in terms of your choices. Now, ask yourself, is more democracy likely to become American policy? Because in order for that to become American policy, those suburban school districts and semi-suburban school districts and those rural districts would have to be willing to accept significant numbers of black and brown students and low-income students and poor students in their enrollment base. You think that's going to happen? We've been at this desegregation thing since 1968. It is now 2018. 50 years have gone by. Okay. Have you seen any suburban district willing to accept any significant numbers of low-income and poor students? Have you seen any of that occur? So the likelihood is that that's just not going to occur. I'm going to get that call in just a quick second. So my point here is that public school choice, permitting students to enroll outside their neighborhoods but within their districts, has been a staple of school reform because you're just inside your district. You can go anywhere inside of Buffalo. But permitting students to choose schools in other districts would give low-income black students and brown students and low-income or poor students the right to opt into affluent, mostly white suburban school districts. Busing poor black children out of neighborhoods with accumulating disadvantages is practically impossible. Yet without integrated education, there is little hope that the educational struggles of the truly disadvantaged can be remedied. So let me grab this call real quick before I get back into my alternatives. All right. Hi, caller. Are you there?
Yes. Good morning, Mr.
Hey,
Hare.
Mother Dora. How you doing?
Well, I had quite a weekend with my granddaughter's graduation from Medaille College. They had a beautiful graduation Friday, and congratulations to her and all of the graduates.
Absolutely.
There were a lot of graduations going on. She did a very outstanding job, Mr. Hare. So between that and we had a family party Saturday, and then we had something at my church. I have been on a whirlwind.
We worn you out, right?
I'm taking the day this morning to kind of relax and rest a little bit. But I want to make a comment on the cursive writing issue because I know one of your callers calls about it quite a bit. I want him to know that it's on the comeback. As a matter of fact, there are some districts around the country that are really including cursive writing as part of their instruction. There's a good program in Dallas where the young people are writing in cursive, and they have a pen pal in the local senior home, homes, where the older people are writing them in cursive because that's what they remember, and the students are writing back in cursive. And cursive has a lot of benefits. And you know, I taught cursive writing. I didn't care whatever anybody else was doing. If you came into Eva Doyle's classroom, you were going to learn how to write in cursive.
Yep.
And there's two different kinds of cursive. I taught the regular cursive, and I taught what's called Denilian. Denilian has more curves and that kind of thing, and it's a little fancier type of cursive. But I taught both of them. So it is making a comeback. And I also wanted to comment on, he mentioned, I think the gentleman's name is Bob.
Bob, right.
He mentioned having other teachers come in. Well, we had, and I was teaching a long time ago, but we had what was called an immersion program. And I think they still have that, where we had teachers come in, and math teachers, reading teachers would come in, and they would do work with the students. Anything that I had introduced, they would give them extra help. So that was a program that we did, and I'm sure they're probably still doing something like that today. So I just kind of wanted to add that to the conversation. You know, I taught a totally blind student. Her name was Annie. I never will forget it. She was in my 5th grade class, and I was never taught how to teach a blind student. But what happened was she came with an aide who was well-versed in how to use Braille. And so whatever I taught in the classroom, the assistant would convert it on the Braille machine, and Annie was able to keep up with the class. And you know what, Mr. Hare? She was a straight A student.
There you go.
I never will forget that. And so I actually picked up on some Braille just watching the aid. So I kind of wanted to share that a little bit. And I'm hopefully today I'll get a chance to work on my flowers and relax a little bit. And I just wanted to know, what's the date of your...
It's June 8th.
Yes, because I do plan to attend, so I'll be calling the CAO so I can get my ticket.
Outstanding.
Hey,
Looking forward.
You, Mr. Hare.
Okay, take care, Mother Doyle. Talk to you soon. Listen, why don't we take our first break, and then I'm going to get these alternatives out for you guys and see what your thoughts are. So just stick with us. We will send us out at the break here at Living right now.
Do you want to increase your home's value? Do you want to lower your energy bills? Are you in need of affordable financing for your next home improvement project? The CAO Home Improvement Resource Program can help. Just come to their monthly HIRP orientation session every second Wednesday of the month at 564 Dodge Street, Building 400. HIRP staff will help identify the resources you need to get financed, and they'll even help you with completing your application. You won't know what you qualify for until you call them today at 881-6543. That's 881-6543. Learn about all the home improvement programs you may be eligible for and ask about the affordable financing program that can help turn your house into your dream home. Call 881-6543 for more info. It's the Home Improvement Resource Program, restoring
detail of what he put into his text. But I guess what I want to... Here we go. All right, welcome back to Living Now here at Power 96.5 FM on your dial at WFO. This is L.Nathan Hare, your host. I'm here with Emmanuel Radford, who's doing the live streaming of the program. And by the way, if you've got your computer or your handheld device, you can type in Facebook and then type in Living Now. You'll be able to see the program actually in production. And you can you can write in or type in your comments, your observations, or your questions, and we'll respond to them on the air as much as we possibly can. What I wanted to do is to provide us with a few alternatives to think about. When I read Dr. Orfield's stuff, if our premise is that what the research shows, that heavy concentrations of poor and low income children in a school tends to push that school into the low performing category, then the solution has to be eliminating schools that have high concentrations of low income and poor students. That just seems to make sense to me. If we know that that's what the demarcation is, why aren't we pushing to solve that problem? Why do we keep trying to find neater ways to recruit kids to voluntarily want to get into this school versus that school, to increase the percentage of black and brown kids who enroll at City Honors from 16% to 17%, and why are we taking those kinds of approaches when that's just tinkering around the edges? It's not really changing the fundamental construct that is producing these low-performing schools and this high degree of segregation that exists in schools. Why aren't we approaching this from a systemic way? And so I'm going to suggest 4 ways that we can try to recreate school districts so that no school has a population of more than 20% low income and poor students. Now, the first one that I'm going to give you won't work. I'm just giving it to you because it's the most sensible thing to say, but it won't work. Forcing traditional public school districts to change the way that they disperse students to schools throughout their district so as to minimize the accumulation factor of high percentages of students with serious social and economic problem sets. This would work in districts where the low-income population is 20% of the district as a whole. But if you got a district where 70% of the kids are poor and low-income kids, how do you redistribute the kids so that no school has more than 20% of its population being poor and low income? So that model works in districts where poverty is not a predominant thing in that school district. You can spread kids out. But it wouldn't work in a district like Buffalo, where 90% or more of the kids in the city of Buffalo are eligible for free or reduced lunch. And if I'm not mistaken, roughly 70% of the kids in the city of Buffalo are in households that are at incomes below 125% of poverty. So I don't think that model would work, but I had to put that on the table. Second would be to carve out slices of high poverty school districts and place them into adjacent suburban school districts so that the reformed school districts will have no schools with a population higher than 20% low income. Just think about that for a second. Take Buffalo as a pie. Instead of having the city of Buffalo periphery or circumference as the school district, you would have school districts where you'd have a piece of Williamsville's school district, Williamsville East, and it would have a piece of Buffalo in it, right? You'd have a Cheektowaga school district, say Cheektowaga Central, and it would have a piece of Buffalo in it, and so on. You could do the same thing on the Riverside area, with Tonawanda and city of Tonawanda, and so on. If you approached it that way, then you could have districts where in the district as a whole, not more than 20% of the students in the district are poor and low income, but the majority of the kids in that district will be kids who actually live in the suburbs themselves. Now, that would require some busing to get that done, but it wouldn't be that much because these would be sort of adjacent, school districts. You would just carve pieces out of Buffalo. Now, people may say that doesn't make a lot of sense, but I need for you to know the reason why you don't have many assembly people in Buffalo who have majority Buffalo school assembly districts or state senators in Buffalo because they have a majority Buffalo senatorial district is because they've always carved pieces of Buffalo out so that Williamsville could have enough so that they could have an assembly person, that Tonawanda could have enough population so they could have a assembly. So they've been carving people out of Buffalo for political representation for the suburban school districts. So the districts become majority suburban school districts, but they're getting enough population to be at 135, whatever, 1,000, whatever the threshold is to make you a senatorial or a assembly school district. They're getting that extra population by carving people out of Buffalo. So the citizens in Buffalo end up being in a senatorial or a state assembly district where they are the severe minority in that district, even though they live in a city where they make up 43% of the people that live in the city, right? So you can't tell me that this is something that you are averse to because you're doing it right now. You've been doing this for like 70 or 80 years. So I'm just taking that model and using it in a way that might be more progressive on behalf of the children in the city of Buffalo. If our thesis is that if you have kids in schools where fewer than 20% of the kids are poor and low-income kids, that the low-income kids tend to adopt the behaviors and values and expectations and norms of the middle-income kids. If that's your thesis, then you have to figure out a way to make that thesis a reality. I'm suggesting that this would be one way to get that done. A third option would be to commit more money to transportation, enabling students to traverse the distances to suburban districts to enable balancing the low-income populations so that you don't have more than 20% low income in any individual school. So when people talk about choice, as we found in our studies on the No Child Left Behind, that when you have kids who are in failing school districts, you have the ability to exercise choice. At least that's what the pieces of paper say, that you can exercise choice. The problem is, how do you exercise that choice? So you put down 5 choices, on your targeted registration, for your kids, for your students and whatnot, or your children. But you never get your first choice, never get your second choice, never get your third choice, and you just kind of default into whatever the 4th or 5th choice is that you had. What they said was that if you couldn't get your child into a school that worked for your child in your school district, you could go to a charter school, or you could go to a parochial school, or you could go to a school in an adjacent school district. But the problem is, how do you get the child back and forth? So there'd have to be some transportation, subsidized transportation, that would allow you to be able to get your child back and forth to other school districts, so your child can go into a school district that has well-performing schools.
You have a question about your second suggestion?
Sure.
The question is, wouldn't that be the same as the busing and desegregation plan of the 70s?
Not the second one. The third one I was going to say is really that. That's exactly what they were saying, except that they were just doing busing to move kids around inside the Buffalo Public School District. The problem with moving kids around inside the Buffalo, back in the 1970s when the desegregation order was first put together by Judge Curtin, only about 24% of the kids in the Buffalo School District were black and brown kids. So dispersing the kids all over the school districts made some sense in terms of balancing, except that for the black and brown kids, they were forced to go to these other schools, where for the Caucasian kids, they had magnet programs that were in the buildings that used to be all black school buildings. They put magnet programs in those buildings, and then Caucasian kids would volunteer to take advantage of those magnet programs. If you didn't volunteer, you didn't go to that school. You weren't forced to go to a school, right? So the black kids had to, and brown kids were forced to go to a school in neighborhoods where people didn't want them, spitting at them, teachers that didn't want to teach them, and so on, right? Where the Caucasian kids, not only did they get to go to a magnet program that they volunteered to go to, the most senior teachers, the most experienced teachers became the teachers in those magnet programs, and they put all kinds of support staff to ensure safety and security and whatever kinds of supports they needed for those kids. So they created the dichotomy that we have right now. So when Judge Curtin decided to end the desegregation order in Buffalo, Buffalo basically dropped the desegregation objectives and just created a way to sustain the basic patterns of the schools that they had already created. And so that's how you got into this situation where tests became the criteria to get into schools like City Honors, Performing Arts, Hutch Tech, and so on. You had to test to be able to get into these schools. You have committees at each high school, right, that decides whether or not they will accept your application to come to that high school. High schools had the right to be able to turn kids down and so on, right? That exists right now. Mm-hmm. And so we keep creating these discretionary choices for the administrators in the district to continue to operate the district in a way that favors the people that they historically have been favoring, and to the disfavor of the people that they historically have not favored. That's what's really been going on. It seems to me that we have to change that basic construct, okay? Let me just give you my fourth one, which is failing these alternatives that I've already provided and accepting that there will be schools left with higher than 20% low-income populations. My suggestion would be that we create a wider diversity of charter schools with smaller class sizes and highly enriched social and ethnic programming that also enables students to engage in broad after-school programming that supports expanded oral literacy, creative thinking, responsible socialization, and supervised sports. In other words, if we can't change the reality of having a very high density of low and poor and low income kids and black and brown kids in our school district, then we have to change the schools themselves. And instead of having 1,100 kids, 1,200 kids, 900 kids in, Kamau hates when I say kids because it sounds like I'm talking about a goat, children in these schools, then to accomplish that goal, it seems to me you should break the schools down to smaller units so that you have no more than 250 or so kids, maybe 300 tops, in a school where the principal actually knows the name of virtually all of the children that are going to that school. I mean, that's what it used to be, in the old days. And when I say old days, I mean my old days, not your old days, right? But, when the principal and the assistant principal and the central staff have a very tactile recognition, know you, know your family, know your older sister, know your older brothers, know your cousins, know how you fit in the community that you're in. The school itself is a part of the community that the school is in. That tends to also weigh towards schools being well-functioning schools, as opposed to schools being sort of taken over by a culture that does not actually see education as a high value to pursue all the time. You see that in the schools that are low-performing schools. They're low-performing, and you also have students attending those schools who don't really value education per se. They only go to school because they're told they have to go to school. If you didn't tell them they didn't have to go to school, they wouldn't go, which is nuts to me. Somebody's putting up $25,000 a year to educate your child for free for 13 years. Why would you not race to go get that resource, right? But that's the reality that we find ourselves in. So my point is that the concentration of the poor into schools where they make up the majority of the students invariably reinforces the separateness of these students from the normative educational experience of middle-income children and the normalization of low student academic achievement. Without integrating residential neighborhoods, there is little hope of integrating education. So either you create the integration by changing how children are deployed in school districts all across across your region, so that you have everybody in a situation where there is a low percentage of poor and low-income children in a school population. And you can do that as a way that I suggested. You can carve out a piece of the high poverty districts so that they become a small part of a middle-income, district. You could increase the resources that you put into transportation and make it possible for people to be able to get from wherever they live to whatever school outside of the District of Buffalo they wanted to attend. I understand that we have these issues about money following the child, so I get that. So if your child lives on Lythe and Alexander and is going to go to a school in West Seneca, I'm just giving that as an example, right? Then the money that the state normally spends on that child has to go with that child to West Seneca. And West Seneca might want $8 more to pay for the busing of that child as well. I mean, those are things that can be worked out. It seems to me that's an approach. Or if we can't do that, obviously we can't desegregate Buffalo. Buffalo has a high percentage of children who are in low-income households and poor households. So since that's our reality, either we make structural changes, innovation to ensure that no school has more than 20% of its population are poor and low-income children, or we have to change the structure of the schools in Buffalo themselves so that we have basically smaller schools and schools that have enriched programming, so that we can create a culture of parents and teachers and administrators that are self-reinforcing of the education aspirations that we have for those communities. I know we're near our last break. I'll wait till our engineer gets here. Our recent research confirms that when children whose parents are well educated comprise a strong classroom majority, all students benefit from the academic culture established by that majority, and there is absolutely no cost to the outcomes of the middle class Caucasian students in those schools. So you get the benefit of a much higher percentage of your student population doing well without injuring at all the educational outcomes of the students that are already doing well. That means that over time you're going to have a culture, a country of people who have done well educationally and are therefore making good strides economically as well as socially. That's got to be good for everybody. It's got to be good for the Caucasian students when they become adults, just like it's good for the black and brown students when they become adults. That's the way that we got to go. So listen, let's take our last break. Then we'll get back into our subject. If you all stick with us, we will see you on the other side of the break here at Living Now, Living Right Now.
Do you want to increase your home's value? Do you want to lower your energy bills? Are you in need of affordable financing for your next home improvement project? The CAO Home Improvement Resource Program can help. Just come to their monthly HIRP orientation session every second Wednesday of the month at 564 Dodge Street, Building 400. HIRP staff will help identify the resources you need to get financed, and they'll even help you with completing your application. You won't know what you qualify for until you call them today at 881-6543. That's 881-6543. Learn about all the home improvement programs you may be eligible for and ask about the affordable financing program that can help turn your house into your dream home. Call 881-6543 for more info. It's the Home Improvement Resource Program, restoring value to neighborhoods across Erie County, one house at a time. Brought to you by the Community Action Organization of Erie County.
All right. I can't sing, so I can't help with that. But welcome back to Living Now. This is L.Nathan Hare, your host. I'm here with Emmanuel Radford, who's doing the live streaming of the program. And again, if you've got a handheld device or your computer, you can type in Facebook on your device and then type in Living Now, and the program will come up and you'll be able to watch us as we're doing the program. But you can also then type in your questions, your observations, or your concerns, and we'll respond to them as much as we can on the air. So why hasn't residential segregation been achieved, or residential desegregation been achieved? You know what my position is. If you have something that you say you want to get done, and you're the one responsible for doing it, and after 10, 15, 50 years, it still hasn't been done, it's hard for you to make me believe that you're telling me the truth when you say this is what you want done. If you really want something done, you will just do it, okay? And the fact that it's not being done means the people who are responsible for doing it don't want to do it. Or the people who could be responsible, maybe they are legally responsible, but they are under the control or humongous influence of people who don't want to see this take place. In other words, there are factors, that it's sort of like when we talk about education funding, and almost all education new funding tends to end up going into the salaries of the people that are already there. And in addition, they usually sacrifice some teachers in order to pay for the increased cost per teacher that gets negotiated. That's not what people say that they want to occur, but that tends to be what does occur. And the innovations and financing of the innovations that you say you're trying to get done in the school districts don't get done because you end up not having any money to be able to do it. There's always a constituency that has a different agenda than what you say you want, right? So the conventional belief is that every reasonable initiative has been undertaken, that civil rights policies, in fact, that civil rights policies may even have gone so far as to have become unfair to whites. You probably know that, right? That's. I'm just telling you what the article says, right? The View asserts that residential segregation is a reflection of individual choice. Now, this is the same hustle that we were hearing when I was a child, that residential segregation is a function of people's choices. Now, I grew up in the Perry Projects, right? Perry Projects was actually a fairly integrated place. It wasn't like a high percentage of Caucasian people, but there were a good number of Caucasian people living in the Perry Projects when I lived there. But the people who lived on the other side of Fulton Street, you have to understand the price. This is like Meridian, Mississippi. There's Town 1 and Town 2. So on the north side of Fulton Street were the projects. That's where we live. On the south side of Fulton Street were houses. To this day, now I moved over there in 1954. To this day, there has never been an African person who has lived on, on the south side of Fulton Street. To this day, okay? Now, that cannot be an accident. You have all of these African people that are living on the north side of Fulton, right? That, between Fulton and Perry Street, from Hamburg up to Chicago Street. All these African and Hispanic people live in this area, right? Yet across the street, from there all the way to South Avenue, all the way to the water, no African person has ever lived in that area, period. Okay? So I say this to you to say that you can't keep saying that this is about individual choice, because I'm sure there were some African people who would love to have lived in a house rather than live in the projects, right? But you just couldn't do it because you were not allowed, right? The people that were in a position to either do it by law or do it de facto. In other words, they would just undermine your ability to be able to get a mortgage or consideration over there. So in reality, living and land use patterns are the result of explicit policies by government to separate the American populations by race. This is not an accident. This is being done on purpose. You could claim it was an accident 50, 60 years ago. You can't tell me it's an accident now when the same thing has been going on for all of this time period. Schools today remain segregated because neighborhoods remain segregated. So as a consequence, you're always going to have these schools in your school districts that are just completely dominated by people who have had the least favorable time in terms of the education experience that they have had for the parents. You tend to have the people that have had the least favorable time in terms of the economics, in this country, have had the least favorable time in terms of people's citizenship being respected, in this country and so on. You create that situation, right? So I know we got a caller about to call in. Let me just make this comment real quick. The lowest income black families with children most in need remain trapped and isolated in historically black ghettos. And what we've done is we've just expanded the ghettos to make them bigger so that we can put more black and brown people in them. Let me grab this caller real quick before I move to my next point. Hi, caller, are you there?
Hi, I am. I was calling. I love everything that you're saying, Mr. Hare.
Thank you.
What we need to also address is the new segregation of our teachers.
Yes.
And how, even though our schools are now predominantly African American, we need to move to have parents become teachers and educators inside those schools. Because to me, there's nothing wrong with being segregated, because we actually did well under segregation. And before desegregation, I believe desegregation killed education.
Yep.
But we had more teachers, black teachers, principals, and leaders, and more successful students out of the schools in segregated schools. But the key element to that is having teachers who are vested in the children
Yep.
in those school systems.
I think you're absolutely right.
I think.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say less than 5% of the teachers in the Buffalo public school system are African American.
Yep. And the main thing, core to what you were saying, is that the schools in the old days, when they were majority African teachers and administrators in those schools tended to have a very, how shall I say, a tactile, tangible relationship with the community that they were in. So, for example, if you went to School 53, most of the people who taught at School 53, they were connected to or lived in the area that was generally served by School 53. And you'd have your uncle, your aunt, maybe even your grandparent, also went to... Go ahead.
Exactly. And that was that way all throughout the United States.
Right.
We had tribalism, well, of course, community tribalism as well, where those teachers lived in that area for class, black people in the streets, the working class, and we really didn't have that much separation, but you were respected.
Right.
And we had a community. We don't, and I was traveling, and when I came back to Buffalo, a white gentleman asked me, because his wife is black, he was like, where is your black middle class here, the neighborhood? We don't even have one here.
Right.
So tribalism and desegregation, or the lack of tribalism and desegregation, has spread us out and has taken so much, basically from the educational standpoint, by desegregating, by people moving to what they thought were better school districts, by not having the tactile feeling again of being next to an uncle, cousin, who's a teacher, relative, right in the community.
Right,
So,
and people knew you. They knew your family. There was a relationship and so on. And so you had sort of. I remember when I was younger, when the report cards came out. It's like everybody in the projects knew when the report cards came out, right? and depending on who you were in the pecking order, my mother had designated people that I had to go show my report card to on my way home before I got to her, right? There were like 5 or 6 people I had to show my report card to. And Lord, don't let me have something on there that wasn't something to be proud of, because I would get talked about, I might get spanked, and all that happened on my way home. Then I get punished at home, right?
Yeah, but we lost a lot of that due to transiency and other things that basically has taken what community is out of community. We've lost all that.
Yep.
We've lost it, but we have small pockets of it when we have children that go to certain churches, and you have like the children that I serve. I'll look at them. I know your mama. I grew up with them. I go to church. Don't try it. But that also that cultural awareness is there in the South, because the majority in certain states where there are black children, are black teachers, they have that automatic connection where you can look at someone and they know they're giving you that look.
Right.
And what's expected educationally as well.
Yep. So we have to go one way or the other, but we can't keep doing what we're doing. We keep trying to tinker around what exists right now. I think we either have to go back to what you just described, where you have community schools. When I say a community school, I mean a school that is really a part of the community that it's in. Smaller schools. You
have to take all those educators. You think they're going to let you take out 60,000 women who are non-African American, who are at the core, the crux of the issue with miseducation of the children in the country?
Nope, I don't think they're going to do that. I'm just saying what would work. But I'm a realist, okay? I understand that the reason why these things have not occurred is because there are people that don't want these things to occur.
Correct. When you're talking about this, that's economics. That's money.
Yep.
It's moving millions and billions of dollars. Now you're talking about people turning up missing. So, because you're messing with their money.
There you go.
But I would just propose starting to put people, a massive amount of parents in schools who aren't afraid of being in those buildings, who look, you don't have to be afraid because you don't speak well or you don't feel like you have power. Every child that is in that building is worth $23,000 worth of power.
There you go. All right, I thank you so much. Look forward to talking again next week.
Likewise.
All right, take care. Excellent. So Frank Horn, who's the head of the Racial Relations Service in the Federal Housing Agency, this goes back into the late 40s, early 50s, that new public housing and urban renewal programs would permit federal funds and powers to be utilized by localities to clear entire neighborhoods, change the location of entire population groups, and crystallize patterns of racial or nationalistic separation by allowing private developers to prohibit occupancy in new developments merely on the basis of race. And that no sooner had the Supreme Court finally declared in 1948 that deeds prohibiting African Americans from purchasing property could not legally be enforced, the new urban renewal law gave developers a weapon for segregation that was more devastating. My purpose in talking about this, highways, that were put like the expressway, put through African neighborhoods. They didn't have to go through those African neighborhoods, but they put them through these African neighborhoods specifically to knock down parts of the neighborhood and then disperse that population someplace else in the city. It's always been this policy direction in this country of doing things in a way that directly impact negatively the fortunes of particular populations of people. We have a caller hanging on. Let me grab that call real quick. Hi, caller, are you there?
Yes, sir. Just a quick question.
Hey.
The use of or the place of using technology to help address some of the issues you raised.
So technology can help, but if the people who are the subjects of education are not people that are versed themselves, not only in the use of technology, but also people that are immersed in the ideation of the value of education, who are constantly supporting education by their daily actions and so on, then it's not going to have an effect. You're just going to create more technology being used by more able people who will then become more able than they were before. So
No, I'm talking about our use of technology.
when you say our, you mean O-U-R?
Our people who want to see something different than what they see now, using the technology as a means to reach people, because everybody has these devices as a way of reaching people to pass the truth or to correct the lies that are errors that are being perpetuated by the system.
Right. I got two more calls to get on, but I'm
No problem.
I get your point. We'll get on that, as we go along.
Sir.
Thanks, man. We got 2 minutes. Okay. All right. So I have a caller hang on. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I could have finished up with Kamal. Let me come back to that because that's going to take me a little bit more time to get through. But highway officials purposely rerouted interstates through African-American neighborhoods close to downtown areas to force the black population to move to ghettos farther from white residential neighborhoods and businesses. My core point that I'm trying to get to here is that we are experiencing the outcomes of design. For-profit schools, Betsy DeVos and her preference for for-profit schools, the idea of running schools like a business, experience teaches us that all her policies result in is more income for the for-profit school management and more segregation of the poor and low-income household students from the middle-income household students. And the consequence of that is a concentration of poor and low-income students into schools that are poor-performing schools, so that even if we have the handheld devices and our ability to use, our iPads, our iPhones, and our various devices, the ability to take advantage of those opportunities and to actually utilize those opportunities for that purpose tends to be to weigh in the favor of those people who are able, middle-income, education-oriented families, and tends not to produce those outcomes in the lower-income and poor families because those families are not led by people who value education that way. I got to run now. We'll pick this up next week. Thank you all for your participation. Look forward to talking on next week here at Living Right Now.